Obviously, forage is very important to these cattlemen and many others around the country. So let's jump into our discussion, gentlemen. And Dave, I'd like to start with you. You talk to a lot of cattlemen in your role. Is this drought still causing cattlemen to focus a lot on being better at producing and managing their forage?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the USDA came out with some statistics that are very interesting, and I've been in this business for about 3 decades now, and I rarely get the opportunity to say that happened before my time. But USDA has said that we've got the lowest on-farm feed stocks, hay supplies, since 1955. Wow. We got into a huge drought. It impacted about 3/4 of our nation's mama cows. And when you get into a situation like that, not only do they consume a lot of the forage that's already on the ground, but they consume a lot of the stocks that you have as safety supplies. Sure. So it's really made folks sit up and take notice that we've got to be a little bit better and more aggressive in managing our forages for situations just like this.
You know, a year ago we sat in the studio here and talked about high corn prices and the impact they were having. We haven't seen a lot of relief in that category yet. What are grain prices doing to the importance people place on producing forage?
Oh, Kevin, that's a huge concern. One of the situations that we're faced with is as you move cattle into a feed yard, it gets very expensive to feed them on a corn-based ration. Putting $1 worth of pound of beef on a calf in a feedlot costs you about $1.25. We can get that same pound of beef put on in a pasture situation for about 50 cents. So when you do the math, it's a no-brainer that these folks really need to focus on producing more low-cost, cheap forage.
And I want to talk to our producers about that. Mike, let's begin with you. What role does forage play in your operation down south?
You know, we can grow a lot of forage, Kevin. We're a cow-calf operation. We also are a grain operation. We raise our own corn. And with cheaper corn, Beck, we used to supplement some of our own grain we raised to make up for shortfalls in our forage program and at different times. But with the expense we have now in raising that corn crop and the value that corn is, you know, we've turned a lot more to trying to feed the grass and go to a more forage base where we don't have to have the high input of a grain supplement to complement our operation.
And Daryl, what about your operation?
Well, Kevin, forage is a huge thing. Our whole operation is based on that. And obviously we want to try to increase our forage base by focusing on soil health. And if we can extend the grazing season and keep our cattle out on the land longer, you know, we're going to save costs and we won't have to feed the high-priced corn and the other grains that we need. So that's how it's affecting us.
And you know, Dave talked a little bit about the changes that we've seen in our industry in a number of regards. Do you think about forage differently today than you did, say, 5 years ago, Daryl? Absolutely.
You know, we started to make the big transition into thinking more holistically back in 2006. And our emphasis was to, you know, increase rest and recovery on our pastures, and put the emphasis back on the soil health, taking care of the land, and it takes care of us.
Mike, what would you add?
You know, the most efficient way to harvest forage is with that animal, that livestock. We've looked at that a lot more, trying to put up less hay, do a little more of harvesting through that livestock. And, you know, with the higher price of livestock, it's a little easier to justify making improvements, improving pastures, making a better forage. My local Dow rep has really helped me save a lot of money. And, you know, when we really look at that weed is when it's seeding out. And that's when I want to try to kill it. Well, he says, you know, I could get more bang for my buck if we go through a plan, spend the same amount of money where I can get the most benefit out of it before those weeds are there, and then I can feed the forage with some fertilizer and not lose it in that weed that's out there.
Well, and I want to follow up on that. Tell me, guys, about some of the production practices you put in place in your own operations to maximize forage production. Daryl, you want to start?
With building our intensive grazing management system, of course, cross fences are a vital tool in what we do. Pipelines, putting in water points, those types of things. With the cross fences and the pipelines and the waters, we can build in the rest and recovery thing. We've got pastures where we have our whole herd of cattle on only for 3 days. That pasture is then rested close to 400 days. We're building the resource, we're building better roots, we're producing more grass. That's how it all comes together for us.
And Mike, you mentioned one of the things you're doing relative to weed management, but tell us more.
You know, I'm with Darrell a lot in getting more rotational grazing where we can be more intensive with our inputs, but we have to be more intensive with our harvest. So we have to get those cattle on the grass when it's the right stage, get them back off, and utilize it to its best potential. We tend to have some rolling ground, heavy clay ground, and you know I can run them on the rolling ground in the wintertime, take them to some flatter ground in the summertime where we don't have so much moisture, and really try to utilize the potential we have, utilize the forage we have to its best potential.
So I'm interested, what are the key challenges you face in managing your forage production, Mike?
We're a very cyclical growing. We can grow 9 to 10 months out of the year, but there's some real highs and lows in our forage-based program, so we have to either stockpile some standing grass to get through those times, harvest some of the excess at other times, put up some hay. You know, we don't want to have to put up any more hay than we have to, but we need some as an insurance policy to make it through some tighter times. But really, like right now going into the spring, I'm going to have a real flush of grass. I've got to have the cattle ready to use that in shape, and before they get down, control that body condition score and keep them in good shape all year. Don't let it cycle with that year.
And Darrell, you ranch in a little different country. You're not seeing a flush of grass, you're seeing a white blanket of snow. But what are some of the challenges you face?
Well, that is probably one of the biggest challenges is our length of cold and winter. And of course the hay and stuff that we have to produce to keep those animals alive. That's our largest cost by far. And if we can extend the grazing season and use our grazing systems and things to stockpile forages, planting cover crops to improve soil health on our cropland when it's applicable, helps us extend the grazing season. And so we can shorten up that winter feeding period, and that which helps makes us more profitable.
Absolutely. Pat, you know, we've talked a whole lot about drought on this show for the last couple of years, really, unfortunately. And what are some things that you would recommend as people begin trying to recover from the drought?
Yeah, it seems like there's a drought somewhere all the time. And that's one of the things that we try to do is we try to monitor our grazing lands, and so that we begin to scout them. Oftentimes after a drought, the grass is set back, it's hurt for a period of time. You're creating space for weeds. Weeds are very opportunistic, especially annual weeds, and so or biennials even. But you'll tend to look for those in the early part of the spring, trying to get them under control so that you can capture the site with your forage grasses. That gives them a better stronghold.
And tell me more about the role weed and brush management plays in that, and specifically some recommendations potentially.
Yeah, well, the key is to try to get those weeds under control, and then you have to integrate, in some cases, depending on the severity of the drought, you may have to plant some grasses in there. And so your weed control timing then has to be put in place that it's going to optimize the control of the weeds and minimal impact on grasses, giving them a better chance to capture the site. So whether it's a fall cool season grass or spring planting for warm season grass, you've got to time that application so that you optimize the grass response and get those weeds under control so the grass can capture the site. That's what you want to hold on to it.
Similar to what Mike was telling us. Dave, what does growing more forage mean to producers?
Well, it kind of goes back to flexibility for the overall operation. You know, there's the old adage, indecision is the key to flexibility, right? Well, not really. Trying to be decisive and getting yourself set to take advantage of early rainfall and the like, and as Pat kind of said, going in there and really making that choice to be aggressive with your forage recoveries and forage management type programs will really help you out in the long run. Once you build that forage base, once you get those grasses coming on and recovering, it allows you to be flexible. You can run more cattle, increase your stocking rates, produce more beef. As Darrell said, you can choose to stockpile forage for later on in the season. Also, you get better grazing distribution. So maybe you rotate your pastures a little bit differently than you have. But it all starts with that very assertive first decision to be aggressive about a forage management plan and getting one developed for your operation.
Mike, maybe you could explain more about some of the things you've done to be more aggressive in that forage management plan.
You know, we hit on grain prices going up, but the other one we hadn't mentioned is our fertilizer costs are astronomical. With these input costs going up, you've got to manage better. We have got to be able to get a return and see that return that we're getting. We don't put out cheap fertilizer anymore. It's all expensive. So we don't want to waste any of that. So before we try to fertilize, we try to clean up a pasture and make sure we're fertilizing that grass where we can recover it back in livestock in a product that we're going to sell.
Yeah.
You know, I'm always trying to improve our pastures, improve our row crop land. It's building the soil a lot like Darrell says, but you have a limited amount of assets you can use and recoup your value.
And Darrell, I'm intrigued by some of the things that you said relative to the experimentation you've done in various cover crops and intensive grazing systems. Tell us more about some of those practices that have improved your forage production capacity.
Well, the cover crops have been really a key for us, Kevin, because we're using 7- and 8-way mixes, sometimes even 10-way mixes, and we're expanding on those. And there we're able to, the big key there is we may be planting a forage crop first and then following it with a cover crop, which adds to our grazing season. And it's building the soil health, it's speeding up the soil biology, and it's allowing us to lower our inputs, not use maybe any fertilizer or very little, and get the boost that we need to see to produce our grain crops that we do produce.
And Mike, if you can produce ample forage, how does that impact your decision making? What are you able to do better or differently when you're able to produce that ample forage?
Oh, it's going into that planning stage of I know how many cattle I can run, how many units. It puts it a little easier where we'll run cattle a little longer before we ship them west, get the cost of gain down because we're gaining on forage instead of grain, and put that whole animal at more value to myself and to the end processor.
And what does ample forage supplies mean to you, Darrell?
Well, you can build flexibility in your management of your resources. It's all about flexibility, like be able to keep your cattle longer, be able to graze them longer, being able to keep them out on the land, changing season of use, and using the livestock as a tool to emulate nature.
If you have the forage and you can manage those cattle to their best potential, you're not behind the 8 ball as much.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Dave's point, there's been a real premium for getting some weight put on cattle before you get them in feed yards. So there's been lots of good benefits in that regard. Guys, this is a wonderful discussion. I'm anxious to ask you a few more questions. Ahead on this special edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman, we'll have more expert tips on the benefits of strong forage and pasture management programs. Plus, a look at the equipment available to cattlemen to help keep their pastures in tip-top condition. Stay with us. We'll be right back.